Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
It's just before midnight in Salisbury Township, Pennsylvania. A quiet neighborhood, nothing unusual, until flashing lights cut through the dark.
Police are called to a home where something is very, very wrong. Inside, they find a family torn apart and two brothers missing. What happened inside that house would shock this community. How did it get this far?
This is the story of the Freeman Brothers. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 30. Yes, I said 30 of Stop Who Does That. I'm your host, Jackie.
I'm your host, Jenna.
And we hope everyone is having a great week. Jenna and I are just freshly back from New Mexico after the Beyond the Crime convention. We had such a wonderful time, didn't we, Jenna?
We really had so much fun. I mean, just from the very beginning of the trip and seeing Albuquerque and doing the conference, and we packed so much into a few days, and
Yeah.
I think we really enjoyed our time in Albuquerque. It very different than Pennsylvania.
Oh my gosh. It is nothing like Pennsylvania, that is for sure. It's very brown. There's pretty much nothing green there. That was pretty jarring. And I would say if you've ever watched Breaking Bad, it's pretty on point.
It is.
With the
And
vibe that you get
I
from
was
it.
going to say the whole vibe of New Mexico, I think Breaking Bad did a good job. I don't think much has
Capturing it.
Yeah. But
For sure.
we
Yeah.
did get to see some cool stuff. We did some shopping, and we went to some local restaurants and bars and got to see the sights. The food was amazing,
Yeah, definitely.
and the conference went really well. We got to meet a lot of other podcasters,
Yeah.
a lot of families, Crystal Gutierrez. So it was a success.
Yeah. It was really cool to mingle and meet people in the community. So the resort that this conference was at, it was actually on a reservation, the Isleta Native American Reservation, which we learned that when you're on a Native American reservation, it's separate from the rest of the United States. So they have their own government. They have their own law enforcement. And we were hearing from families, Native American families who have lost loved ones due to unusual circumstances, and they were telling us their loved ones' stories. And one thing that stood out to me was how, after they got done sharing the story, they would always say, I feel a little bit better. It always makes me feel better to talk about it. And one of the things that we encounter working in the true crime space is you get comments from people that say, why bring this up? It happened 30 years ago. Stop talking about it. You're just re-traumatizing people and their families. And we take the position of if we stop talking about it, these people are forgotten about.
Mhm.
And just hearing that from these families made me feel like we're doing the right thing by sharing these stories and just
Yeah.
keeping the conversations going about what led up to these crimes and how we can prevent them going forward and be
Keeping-
better advocates. Yeah.
Keeping the memory alive of the victim. That's why we like to do the cases, is like you said, just keeping the memory alive. And the more and more people that hear about it and learn about it, more good can be done. And that's what the families are looking for. And it was a really great perspective. Hearing from the families and thanking us for doing what we're doing and getting the word out. And, we definitely will be doing Native Indigenous missing person story in the future.
Yes. And we're definitely going to do one from New Mexico. And then we'll talk about how the reservations work and kind of explore that as well with you guys so you can learn something. Because one of the things Jenna and I said was, I don't think people on the East Coast really understand how these reservations work and what they're comprised of and like
Oh,
that whole thing. And actually the one mom, she was like, "Thank you so much for asking questions and
yeah,
trying to learn
yeah.
about us because we really are closed off from the rest of the US living in an urban community
Metropolis.
where." Yes. Yeah.
It's very different, and I think that was our biggest takeaway from our trip was getting to learn about the culture and the people down there in the
Yeah.
Southwest, specifically New Mexico. It was really awesome, and we had
Yeah,
a
and
great time.
we got to meet Carmita and Nicole from Missing in the Pacific Northwest. They're
Yeah,
members of our network. And Hopper Daly from The Final Trace.
yeah.
We love him.
We had the
He's just a wonderful person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had the best time, hanging out with the other members of our network, and it
Yeah.
was great. So hopefully we'll get to another one soon. And we did the live podcast that is available on
Yes.
Instagram. I did post it on there, so if you missed it on Saturday the 11th, it is on our Instagram, the whole live stream. So check it out.
Yes. You just aren't able to see the audience, but we had at least
Yeah.
15 people stop
Yeah.
and sit down and listen to us, which was so weird because
I had a lot of fun doing it. We got to sit next to each other.
which was weird.
I loved it. And we just had a lot of fun and people were really engaging with us. So
Yeah.
I'd love for us to do that again in the future as well. So, and we're back. We're ready to get into a new case. And before we get started, I do just want to mention and give a shout out to one of my best friends, Janine Hemond, for recommending yet another great case from the Lehigh Valley that we are bringing to you today.
Janine's on fire. She is. She's pulling them out of the vaults of the Lehigh Valley.
Yeah. Well,
All right.
get
So let's
into it.
get into it. Well, Salisbury Township, Pennsylvania, set in the Lehigh Valley, is the kind of place where people feel safe. Quiet neighborhoods, families, good schools, nothing out of the ordinary. But on the night of February 26, 1995, that sense of safety was completely shattered because inside one home, something unthinkable happened. And the two people responsible were not who you would expect. This is the story of the Freeman brothers.
Raised with strict religious beliefs, accused of murdering their own family.
They were dead set on killing their parents. They would talk about it every time I saw them.
An act of violence that turned the spotlight on the bizarre hate group they joined.
Tattoos all over their body and on their foreheads and swastikas on them and everything.
What turned these little boys into these frightening young men? Tom Jarrell investigates their chilling journey. Going berserk.
Well,
Okay, well, there you have it. That is our big case, the Freeman Brothers of Salisbury Township in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. To understand the heinous acts that happened the night of Sunday, February 26, 1995, we have to start with the Freeman family itself. Dennis and Brenda Freeman were raising their 3 children in Salisbury Township, Pennsylvania. Like we mentioned, it's part of the Lehigh Valley where some of our other cases have happened. And just a reminder, it's the Lehigh Valley encompasses 3 big cities, Allentown, Easton, Bethlehem, and then a bunch of other smaller cities and townships. So Salisbury Township is kind of in the Center Valley area of the county. It's a beautiful area. Small schools, nice neighborhoods, nice houses, very quaint. They were deeply involved in their faith as Jehovah's Witnesses, Dennis and Brenda, and they raised their children with those same values, structure, discipline, and a strong belief system that shaped their home life. But as their 2 oldest sons, Bryan Freeman and David Freeman, entered their teenage years, things began to change. By the time the boys were in junior high, they were being bullied at school, often because of their religious background. You know, Jackie, as a Jehovah's Witness, you cannot celebrate holidays, birthdays, none of that. So I can imagine as young boys, they were a little bit different than their
Mm-hmm.
peers. So when someone's celebrating a birthday, of course, they are not allowed to have the treat that is brought in. They're not allowed to make a craft for Christmas to bring home. I can imagine growing up like that is very hard on a young child that just wants to be like their peers.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to say I'm pretty sure they don't celebrate birthdays or holidays. And they also blood transfusions. They don't. They decline blood
Oh, I
transfusions.
didn't know.
So yeah, I've actually encountered this in healthcare. So there are some patients like you talk to them like, your risk could be internal bleeding, blah, blah, blah. Or
Yeah.
if you're going into surgery, are you okay with a blood transfusion? And some people are like, no, I don't want that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I can see why people at school would feel like they're weird.
Yeah, especially in 1995.
Mhm.
Just and it like I mentioned before, it was a small school district.
Mhm.
So it wasn't like some of the bigger ones in the Lehigh Valley. It was small. So they just had a small group of friends to choose from. Instead of leaning further into the faith, they actually began completely pulling away from it.
Mhm.
So by 1991, Ryan was around 13 years old and David was 12. They had already, at that time, started experimenting with drugs and alcohol, which is
Wow.
very young. I mean, that's like 6th and 7th grade. I
Yeah.
don't know where they were getting it from, Jackie, but they they were the oldest and then they had a younger brother, Eric. So it's not like they were getting it from an older sibling,
Mhm.
maybe someone in the neighborhood or somebody they were hanging out with. Their parents didn't have it as Jehovah's Witnesses, so I don't know who was supplying them with drugs and alcohol, but 6th and 7th grade is very young to get into that.
I can share a little bit of a personal story. So I don't tell a lot of people this, but I was homeschooled for 10 years and raised in a very strict Baptist religion. So I can kind of relate to them a little bit. And I will say my older brother, he actually wound up becoming very troubled. Not that young, but that's kind of when he started noticing, well, we're different from everyone. And
Yeah.
it was the neighborhood kids that he got involved with and started experimenting with drugs and
Wow.
alcohol. So
Yeah.
I wonder if it was just people in the communities. Maybe they thought, well, people think we're weird. We're going to show them we're really cool, and
Yes.
probably got connected to some older
Yes.
kids and got their drugs and alcohol.
I could definitely see that happening. In fact, it really got so bad. Their parents were so concerned that 2 years later, now this has been going on for 2 years, in 1993, um, they sent both of the boys to a
Oh,
rehabilitation facility, hoping that it would get them back on track. So now they're 14 and 15. Now they're just getting more into their teenage years.
hmm,
And the parents, they I mean, I think they were loving parents. They cared about their sons. They went out of their way to, send them and pay for this rehab facility, which we know is not cheap, especially for two kids.
yeah.
So they're hoping this is going to set them back on track and like get them back to the faith and, just become more of an average teenage boy. But according to extended family, that decision may have actually had the opposite effect.
Hmm.
Because, Jackie, it was there that Bryan and David were first introduced to neo-Nazi ideology. They didn't just take an interest, they became completely consumed by it.
So they met someone in the rehab that introduced them to this. So this is actually something that doesn't get talked about a lot. So I don't mean to air out family stuff, but my brother did enter some kind of treatment when he was older, older teen. And unfortunately, when you go to those programs, you're meeting other troubled kids too.
Yes.
And again, I can see where the Freemans are coming from. Like, they want to get their kids help, like any good parent would, and like my parents did. But then your child, who's already displaying some troubled behavior, they're meeting other troubled kids and they click and they become friends. And then before you know it, they're opening up a
Yeah.
door
You
into
know
this
what?
other world.
Like
Yeah.
Cosmo DiNardo and Sean
Yeah.
Kratz from
Yep.
the Lost Boys of Bucks County. They were both troubled, and guess what? When they became friends, it just exploded into very bad things.
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this because it is a risk, unfortunately, at times of sending your child or going to a rehab, like even as an adult, right? You're an addict, you might just be addicted to, I don't know, cocaine or I don't, I'm not saying like any drug, but you might meet somebody there and then you meet up on the outside when you get out. And then if you both relapse, you get into even further drugs
Yeah.
and
And
you're
more
introduced to a
people
whole different
and
circle of people.
other troubled. Yeah. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, this decision didn't go in the direction
Yeah.
that the parents were hoping for. So by high school, now they're both in high school. Um, Bryan and David. The change in them was impossible to ignore at this point. Classmates described a dramatic shift. The brothers, and this is what they're most known for, is dressing like neo-Nazi skinheads. Doc Marten boots, army fatigues, and they would even wear swastika armbands and Nazi-style symbols. They shaved their heads, and that's why
Hmm.
they are known as the Skinhead Brothers. That is what they became known as, infamously after these crimes because of the neo-Nazi ideology and this cult, basically, that they became a part of. It
Hmm.
consumed their life.
You know, it's interesting because I remember in the 90s, you'd go to the mall and you'd see people
Yeah.
that were like that.
Army
And
fatigues,
yeah,
the combat boots. So yeah, you can
yeah.
picture it. And it didn't stop there. The boys actually both got tattoos tied to the ideology. Brian got a berserker across his hairline and a swastika skull on his neck, and David got the Sieg Heil tattooed across his forehead. And we can pull up pictures later, Jackie, but they are right at the hairline
Oh
in the
my
front of
gosh.
their forehead. So with the shaved head, and then these tattoos. Now, mind you, these are kids in high school walking around their high school with these Nazi symbolism tattooed.
That would not happen today. I can
I
tell
was,
you that right
absolutely.
now.
No, they wouldn't be allowed in the building. Besides the tattoos, they also, at this point, were just physically massive to young men. They were very large. They were over 6 foot tall and over 200 pounds each. So these are not scrawny, tiny little boys. These are massive, almost grown men, 16 and 17 years old, but they're the size of a man. And just think of how, there they are. Yep, you can see the tattoo on the neck.
Kyle and then the berserker. Yeah.
Yeah, right across the top of the hairline. Jackie, I can't imagine like being in school with, like we said, this would never happen today. But like they were actually allowed in the school building and to take classes. Imagine being their classmate. They are extremely intimidating.
Oh my gosh, I know.
So with
I remember seeing them as
yeah,
a kid, not them, but like skinheads and being so terrified of them.
yeah. Um And this happened when I was in elementary school at the time because this happened in my area. And back then, I was talking to Janine about this the other week when we were talking about the case. Like, there was no social media, obviously. So any information we got on the Skinhead Brothers murder was all through the newspaper and the local, WFMZ news and the newspaper. So we were, in fact, only being shown certain things. It wasn't until
Right.
many 20 years later that we saw a lot of these pictures and a lot of the stuff about the family. So just keep that in mind. It was kind of protected by not having social media. At the time, it wasn't,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
everywhere. But so these boys are getting huge, they're intimidated. They got tats all over their face, which also back in 1995 wasn't really a thing. So that like stood out even more. And with
Mhm.
that came the violence. Their relationship with their parents, especially their father, Dennis, became increasingly volatile. There were physical altercations, and according to family members, both parents had grown afraid of their own sons. And at school, the behavior was escalating as well. There was reported
Mhm.
incidents with the teachers, administrators, including one just days before the murders happened where Bryan allegedly used an anti-Semitic slur towards the principal
Oh my
and
gosh.
threatened violence. Police had already been called to the home multiple times. Nothing, far this point goes, had ever resulted in an arrest, but the police were called many times. Behind the scenes, Dennis and Brenda were struggling to get help from multiple organizations,
Mhm.
desperate to regain
Yeah.
control of the situation that was clearly spiraling. Weeks before the murders, Dennis and Brenda made a joint decision. They sold the boys' car, hoping it would stop them from traveling to all these neo-Nazi events and hanging out with the wrong people. But just like this is a pattern in this case, just
Mhm.
like the religion and just like rehab, it had the opposite effect.
Right.
Instead of diffusing things, it made everything worse. And according to a classmate, Bryan was furious and said if he had been there when it happened, he would have killed his parents on the spot. And at that point, the warning signs were everywhere, and soon the warning signs would turn into something, as we know, far more serious.
So these boys are just angry ticking time
Yeah,
bombs.
it was a
They're
matter of
huge.
time.
And you're the parents. I mean, Jenna, we have kids. It's like I can't imagine coming home every day and being scared of my own children.
Being afraid of your own child. In fact, I've been watching old Sally Jesse Raphael shows, and one of
Yeah.
the episodes is I'm afraid of my own child.
Yeah.
This was especially popular in the 90s. I
Mhm.
think parents felt alone. Like we said, there was no social media. So, Dennis and Brenda are desperately trying to get
Right.
organizations. I mean, there was no really mental health help either at this point,
Mhm.
I think was a big problem.
It's like how much of it is true teenage rebellion versus mental health
Yeah.
versus are they demon seed? I don't know. Like, do they become possessed? Like, what happened
Oh,
here?
yeah, what happened? Yeah.
I mean, I just, there's always people judging you as a parent, right? People are like, oh, if that were my kid, I'd kick their ass. And it's like, well, sometimes kids fight back.
Yeah.
Know,
Sometimes
not
kids are
that simple.
sometimes kids are 6 foot and 200 pounds, and I think you're
Yeah.
gonna wanna think twice before you anger them.
Yeah.
They're full of rage, and these
I
kids
know. And
were just start
yeah.
yeah.
And in retrospect, you're like, well, maybe they should have just let them go. Who knows what would have
Honestly,
transpired.
Jackie, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Hindsight's 2020. Maybe we should have just been like, "You know what? You wanna do this? Good luck.
Have at
Good
it.
luck.
Yeah.
See ya. Go live with your neo-Nazi cult family," because they had a younger son as well, Eric, and he was still at home. I mean, I can't imagine the terror he felt every
Oh
day.
my gosh.
This
And
whole
that's another thing. We don't talk about sibling abuse.
Yeah.
Siblings, older siblings especially, can really abuse their younger
Yeah,
siblings.
that poor little boy. Yeah.
Oh, well, as things started to escalate, we get to February 27th, 1995. It was a quiet Monday evening for the rest of the neighborhood, but Valerie Freeman was getting an awful feeling. Valerie lived just across the street from her brother, Dennis Freeman. So this is the boy's aunt,
Mhm.
Valerie. She lives across the street. She told the police that her 11-year-old nephew, Eric, had a routine, that he would stop by her house after school almost every single day. But that day, he didn't come by. Concerned, Valerie went to check on the house herself, and what she saw was enough to make her call 911. When police arrived, they made a tactical entry into the home. So they're taking what's it called? The ramrod?
Yeah, they're like probably had a whole SWAT team.
Yeah. When police arrived, they made a tactical entry into the home, breaking down the doors, entering where Eric lived with his father, 54-year-old Dennis Freeman, and his mother, 48-year-old Brenda Freeman, and his older brothers, Bryan and David who were 17 and 16 at this time. At first, there were no signs of forced entry, nothing appeared disturbed, until they noticed a baseball bat covered in blood leaning against the far wall. They knew something horrible had happened. Salisbury Township police officer Jeffrey Renniger stated, "We knew something horrible had happened. The first room we made entry into was the master bedroom. The room was just covered with blood spatter. We found a male, obviously bludgeoned to death. We backed out of the room, and then the next room we checked, we found an 11-year-old male laying half on the bed. It was obvious that he had been bludgeoned to death also." As they searched the house, they headed to the basement where they found a woman dead. Because of the injuries, the victims were unrecognizable. But after speaking to Valerie Freeman, the police believed that these are the bodies of Dennis, his wife Brenda, and their 11-year-old son Eric. At 7 p.m., the Lehigh County Coroner's Office arrived. They determined that the woman had been stabbed multiple times and then bludgeoned with a barbell from the nearby weight rack. In the master bedroom, the scene was a little bit different. The injuries were just massive, blunt force injuries to the father's face and head. Looking at the position of the body, he was probably laying in bed sleeping when he was initially bludgeoned. There was blood spatter on all four walls and the ceiling of the master bedroom, and the mattress underneath the body was soaked in blood, Jenna.
Ugh.
But there was one thing that the investigative team noticed. There was a void pattern on the one-bedroom wall. You could basically see where somebody may have been standing during the assault, while somebody else on the other side of the bed was inflicting the injury, causing the blood spatter in that direction of the other person, causing a void pattern on the bedroom wall there. So imagine a bed, Jenna, and then you've got a wall on either side. There was so much blood spatter that what they're saying is you can see the outline of two individuals on either side of the bed on the wall because the spatter is obviously the spatter's hitting them
Being-
and hitting the wall,
That's a
causing a void
gruesome,
behind them.
gruesome crime scene. Yeah. So the one brother was probably doing the bludgeoning and the other one was standing there. I mean, that's a lot of blood, Jackie. Like, that's a lot of anger.
That is just horrific. Ultimately, it was determined that Brenda had been stabbed 4 times in the torso with one wound perforating her lung. That lung filled with blood for several minutes before she was bludgeoned with the barbell. The autopsy and investigation confirmed that Dennis had been bludgeoned to death with the baseball bat first. And then Eric, the little boy, their little brother, was struck 6 times with the pickaxe handle. Investigators believe that given the 4 different weapons, there were at least 2, maybe 3 perpetrators, and they most likely killed Sunday evening, February 26th. That's just a gruesome scene, and that's horrific that you spent 16, 17 years with this family, your mom, your dad, your little brother, and you're just wailing on them. And you're not doing it once, you're doing it twice. You're doing it to 3 different people. Walking through the house, finding them, getting them in their sleep.
It was a surprise. Yeah,
Disgusting.
that's why they're known as the Menendez brothers of Pennsylvania, because it was only a few short years after Eric and Lyle Menendez killed their parents that Bryan and David did the same thing. So it was a short,
Mhm.
it was only a few years. It was the early 90s. The Menendez brothers had just happened. And
Right.
so that's why everyone in the community kind of referred to them as Menendez brothers copycats, kind of, except unfortunately, they had a little brother,
know.
innocent soul, that was involved in that. To me, is the most heartbreaking, disgusting part, is they did that to their little brother. For what? Like, oh.
They just, I guess, I don't know. And it's like, we talk about the Menendez brothers now with, our 2026 lenses and the sexual abuse that they experience at the hands of their father gives them some mitigating factors, right, for the Menendez brothers. But like, this is like, what?
Yeah, like, what the fuck did your brother ever do to you? Yeah, he's 11. Like,
I feel like whatever they were involved with, they must have invited some demons into their bodies because
Yeah.
I don't know what the fuck possesses you
Yeah, this
to do
sounds,
something so heinous and disgusting to your own family.
it does sound demonic. You got that
It
right.
really does.
It really
It
does.
really does.
It really does. And it almost sounds like they were demonically possessed like for many years, and that's why nothing was helping them get better. It's truly disturbing.
I mean, I know there's people out there, they don't believe in, you may not believe in a god or, supernatural deities or anything like that. And I have my skepticism as well, but like when you read cases like this where people just do the most disgusting things and you can't fathom it. It's like either they're mentally ill or or they're possessed by something because there's just no way to explain this.
I know. There's really not. So when, the police determined the family members who were deceased, there was 2 family members missing, of course, which were Bryan and David Freeman. There was no evidence and no trace of the older 2 boys, but there was something that was missing from the home as well as the boys, and that was Brenda Freeman's 1988 black Pontiac Sunbird. It was missing from the driveway.
Right, because they don't have a car anymore. It got sold. Yeah.
Right. They don't have a car anymore. So they took Brenda's car. They took their mom's car and they're gone. The local police put out a statewide bolo, be on the lookout for the car, as police began trying to figure out where Bryan and David may have gone. They quickly focused on someone close to them, their cousin, 18-year-old Nelson Birdwell.
Oh, it's always a cousin.
Okay, so this is a third. The police thought there may be a third. So
Okay.
this might be him. Birdwell, of course, shared the same neo-Nazi beliefs as his cousins, even having Berserker tattooed along his hairline too. Wow, I want to know what tattoo artist was doing this. Maybe they were doing it to, each other, but like I find it hard to believe that any tattoo artist would do that, but
Well, who knows?
they were getting it done somewhere. So
Somewhere on the Lehigh Valley, that's for sure, Jenna. We should find out who it was.
I was going to say, I wonder if the person who did it is still alive. That was 30
Yeah.
years ago. He could be.
Well, if you're listening and you know the tattoo artist, we'd love to know
We'd love to know how that
why you would do that.
session went.
My God.
According to his parents, so according to Nelson's parents, no one had seen him either since a day before the murders. So that would be
Wow.
Saturday, February 25th was the last time that Nelson Birdwell was seen. I'm sure we can assume he was with David and Bryan. At that point, investigators expanded the search and they issued a nationwide alert at this time, a nationwide alert for all 3 teens, along with the missing black Pontiac. Just a couple days later, on March 1st, a truck driver called in a tip from a motel in Hubbard, Ohio, which Ohio's on obviously the other side of Pennsylvania. That's not a short trip. It takes a good 7 hours just to get across the state to begin with. So they made their way to Ohio by March 1st. He said he had seen 3 young men matching their description. Neo-Nazi skinheads. Can't miss them.
Right.
Staying there the night before. When police arrived, the boys were already gone, but they had left behind a few clues. An empty pizza box and a record of 2 phone calls. One of the phone calls led them to a home in Hope, Michigan, owned by Frank Hess, known locally to, guess what, Jackie, have ties to the skinhead scene. So like we said, this is a whole cult club of these weirdos. So
They're networking.
they're making their way up to Michigan to see Frank. Michigan State Police went to check it out. They went to Frank's home, and what did they find sitting outside? Brenda's black Pontiac Firebird right there in the driveway. Officers set up surveillance, and they also called for backup. And not long after, they watched as the Freeman Brothers and Birdwell and Frank Hess got into the Pontiac and drove off, heading to a remote pole barn in the woods. the police surrounded the barn and ordered all 3 men to come out. Which, in a strange twist of events, after everything that just happened, all 4 men complied and immediately surrendered to the police.
That's interesting. They seem like the type of people that would fight to the bitter
I
end with
know. I thought
their
for sure
rifles.
they would have a standoff in the pole barn, at least. Like, how anticlimactic. You're just going
Yeah.
to surrender after all of that and being on the run and crossing state lines.
Yep.
So, in the end, were they even that tough after all? They just surrendered.
Well, they didn't want to die, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, Hess told police he had met the brothers at a skinhead concert and had invited them to visit Michigan if they were ever in the area. How nice of him.
Mhm. Yeah.
How hospitable. He said they never mentioned anything about a murder, though. But they left that part out. They never told Frank. They told Frank, "Hey Frank, we're in Michigan. Can we come by
Yeah.
and hang out?" They actually forgot to tell him they were on the run for murder.
Can you imagine you're at a concert and you meet some cool people, and most of the time I feel like people probably just get drunk and happy and they're like, man, if you're ever in the
Yeah.
area, come stop by, but you don't actually mean it. And then these fuckers kill their aunt and their mom and dad, and they're like, oh, remember that guy Frank from that concert? Yeah, let's go to Michigan. He offered,
They really took him up on that offer, didn't they?
I mean, it was probably the only friend they had.
Yeah,
Let's be real.
besides their cousin. Yeah. So, sure, at that point, like, Frank Hess was shitting his pants. He probably was
Yeah.
like, what the hell did I get myself involved in?
Yeah.
I was just trying to be cool to these dudes. And now I'm in, like, being questioned about a murder investigation. So luckily for Frank, he was completely cleared and released of any, relations with the murder or Pennsylvania or anything like that. So Frank left and probably never looked back. He was
Mhm.
Nelson Birdwell claimed he didn't know about the murders until they were already on their way to Michigan. That changed, though, when prosecutors announced they planned to try the 3, as adults and pursue the death penalty, which back in 1995, they still had the death penalty for minors.
Mhm.
So, facing that possibility, the brothers agreed to a deal. They would confess if the death penalty was taken off the table. Like we mentioned, that was still a real possibility for minors. That all changed in 2016 with the new laws. We'll get into that later. But in 95, the death penalty was a clear possibility. The deal was accepted, and on March 6th, investigators finally heard what happened inside that house. According to Bryan and David, the night of the murders started out normally. They had gone to the movies with Nelson and returned home after their 11 p.m. curfew, which I think is generous for a teenager. Their curfew wasn't like
Mhm.
9, it wasn't like 9 p.m. I mean, that's
Yeah.
nothing to be mad about. So they got home after the already late curfew. Their mother, Brenda, was angry, and she told Nelson to leave. She was like, you know what, Nelson, just go home. When she came back down to the basement to talk to the boys, she found that Nelson was still there. And this made her even more angry. She asked again, leave now. It's time to leave. It's then that Bryan went upstairs, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and immediately started attacking his mother. At some point during all of this, Dennis, who had been upstairs, became the next target. Investigators believe he was attacked in his bed, like we mentioned earlier, while still asleep, never even having a chance to defend himself. And then, of course, there was Eric, just 11 years old. This is hard for me to even say out loud, but he was in bed, still in his pajamas, and he was beaten to death. It's absolutely sickening.
I want to know why they couldn't have left him alone.
They should have just we always ask this, like, why do any of this? Why didn't you
Yeah.
just pack up your shit and leave? Go to Michigan. Go.
You could have gone to Michigan without doing any of this.
Exactly. 3 members of the same family killed inside their own home, all in a span of a single night. And this is where it just becomes so disturbing, Jackie, because all of those
Mhm.
warning signs that we talked about earlier, the family tried desperately to do everything right to get their son's help. And none of it worked. Not one single thing.
If anything, it just kept backfiring and backfiring and backfiring, and they got worse and worse
Mhm.
and worse. And I don't know. I mean, that's if we had the answer to this, we'd be millionaires. But it's like, what is it in some people that makes them respond to the help, and then others it makes them even worse?
Yeah, it makes them act out even worse. And yeah, we can easily say, looking back, they should have just let them leave. But they were parents who loved their sons and
Mhm.
they wanted them to get better. I think that's one of the saddest parts is they actually cared so much.
Right.
And that's the thanks they get.
Well, on March 8th, 1995, after confessing, all three were extradited back to Pennsylvania. Forensic evidence quickly tied each of them to the crime scene. We have Brian's fingerprints found on the knife, David's on the baseball bat, and the blood on Nelson's shirt put him inside the bedroom where Dennis Freeman was killed. Faced with that evidence, Bryan and David eventually entered guilty pleas. So everything they confessed to seems to line up with the evidence. They were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nelson chose to go to trial. I'm sure he had an attorney that was saying, well, they know you were in the room, but did you actually do it?
There's always
So,
one, Jackie. There's always one that fights to the bitter end to go to trial.
yeah. In April of 1996, he was convicted of the murder of Dennis Freeman, but acquitted in the murders of Brenda and Eric. I would assume lack of physical evidence putting him in the room or, blood or handprints on the murder weapons. So I guess it would have been easy for them to say, well, you were there, but did you actually kill Brenda and Eric? Well, we can put you in the room with Dennis, but we can't do that with Brenda and Eric. So at least he got convicted with something because you know what? He was sentenced to life in prison without parole as well. So one conviction is as good as three at this point. Even with those convictions, though, there was one part of this case that was missing, and that is no one actually took full responsibility for killing Eric. If you notice what we've read to you so far about their confessions, no one actually admitted to killing Eric.
Cowards. Yeah.
Yeah, they probably couldn't even bring themselves to talk about it either. So, following the Supreme Court's 2016 decision about life sentences for people convicted as adults while juveniles, both Bryan and David were granted resentencing hearings. So, in 2016, there was a decision about juveniles being sentenced to life. So it opened them up now in present day to have a resentencing hearing. In Nelson's case, his sentence was unaffected by the ruling because he was 18 at the time of the murders. He remains incarcerated at the State Correctional Institute at Frackville. Bryan is currently incarcerated at the State Correctional Institution, Cole Township, Pennsylvania. David is at a different correctional institution in Mahoney, Pennsylvania. However, in a shocking twist, on February of 2024, a Lehigh County judge sentenced 46-year-old Bryan and 45-year-old David to terms of 60 years to life after a resentencing hearing. Both have served just under 3 decades in prison for their murder convictions and would be in their 70s before they're eligible for parole. So remember, they took a plea deal to get life in prison without the possibility of parole. And now they're saying there's a chance
They
here?
were resentenced, and I hope they never get out. That is absolutely horrifying. I would hope they die in prison well before their 70s because the thought of them being out in our community is a little bit scary.
Well, Jenna, there's another plot twist coming here. They had that resentencing done. Then, just 3 months ago, January 2026 of this year, the Superior Court said that Judge Reicht Lee should have recused himself since he worked on the case back in the 90s due to the appearance of bias. Judge Reichley, he was involved in 2024 with the resentencing. The DA can and most likely will appeal this decision, and that could bring the boys back to court for a third sentencing.
Insanity.
All these technicalities. In the 2024 resentencing, Bryan wept as he expressed remorse and took responsibility for what he called a, quote, terrible crime. Everyone deserves to live a safe, happy life free of violence and pain, and I took that away from my family and my community. I would give anything to have my family back and take away all the trauma, he said. He also noted his religious faith gave him the belief that he would be able to see his family again and apologize to them and beg for their forgiveness. Both brothers now are eligible for parole. Their juvenile brains are now fully adult. They've shown remorse, but is that enough? That won't bring back Brenda, Dennis, or Eric. So we talked about Jamie Sylvonic. We talked about how young she was when she thought that killing her parents was the only option to her living this wonderful life with her boyfriend. And then we've got these two very troubled boys who brutally murdered 3 people in their family. I guess the difference with Jamie is she didn't actually commit the murder. She just sat there in the back seat.
I think there's
But
a big difference because
there is a difference here.
he was being manipulated and groomed by an adult man, and these two brothers were showing, and she had shown no signs of violence or disobedience or anything in the past. She was
Right.
never in trouble before, but these two boys had so many red flags and so much history of being troubled. I think there's a huge difference, and I don't feel sorry for them, and I hope they rot the rest of their life in prison. I hope they never see the light of day again.
I don't know what it is that makes people so troubled, so callous, so evil, other than I think something just possesses them. Because that case right now going on, the little girl that was murdered by the FedEx driver,
Yeah, we talked about this.
what came over him? And that's what makes me believe there has to be something evil on this earth. And we talked about this with Hopper. It's like, is planet Earth really hell? And when we die, is that actually heaven? Like, is that
And are these old demons walking amongst us? I believe
Right.
they are.
right? I don't know. I don't mean to get existential on you all, but there comes a point where you read enough of these cases, you learn enough about them that you just can't possibly wrap your head around it.
They're not.
And I know I
they're-
probably
it's like
sound
it's like
Yeah.
they have no humanity. They're not. They don't. They're not. These are not human. Like to do something like this. So, yeah, and maybe they feel sorry now. I don't even know if I believe them. So they'll live
I
on
don't either.
their remaining years. Hopefully, they will never get out. And I hope they think every day about their mother, father, and brother. I hope they are haunted by their memories every single day.
I do too. Well, I hope you all learned something new today. Give you a lot to think about as we parent our children, right?
Yeah, great
Do you
point.
double down, or do you just let it ride and
You let them figure
maybe
it out
grow
on their
of it?
own. Let them
right?
fly the nest. You know, if they're not going to listen to your rules under your roof, I mean, this case was kind of eye-opening in that regard. Do you just let them fly then and say, you know what, good luck. You can't act like that under my roof.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
All right. Well, we'll see you next time. We are going to be going to Royersford, Pennsylvania for our next case. This is a recent one.
Yeah.
We're kind of bringing it back to my neighborhood. We're going to go over that case with you next week.
Thank you guys for listening, and
Yes. Thank
we'll
you.
see you next time.
All right.
Yep.
Take care.
Bye.
Another podcast from the Dark Cast Network. Castles and Cryptids. Enjoy.
We are Castles and Cryptids, where the castles are haunted and the cryptids are cryptic as fuck.
We're a couple of Canadian chicks who are fascinated by freaky shit, so join us as we fall down numerous rabbit holes.
Numerous, so very many rabbit holes.